Hi everyone, thank you so much for the opportunity to present today. I will be discussing research on the impacts of public works programs on child labor and schooling. This is joint work done by myself, Anna Demart, Subramani, and Eric Mukiyahi. Public works programs, or PWPs, are one of the main tools for social assistance in low and middle income countries. Every African country operates at least one PWP. And while there is a growing literature on the positive effects of these programs on adult economic outcomes, at least in the short run, there is very limited evidence on the potential spillover effects that these programs may have on children. While PWPs do not target children directly, they may indirectly influence children's welfare through various mechanisms. For example, under an income effect, a PWP may boost poor households' income. Then, assuming child schooling is a normal good, we may expect parents to reduce time children spend in labor and increase investments in children's education. On the other hand, the PWP may induce parents to spend more time outside of the household, thus creating a substitution effect by which children are more likely to drop out of school and take up the parents' pre-PWP labor activities. Therefore, in the absence of rigorous empirical analysis, the net impact of PWPs on children's welfare is not known. Towards this end, the main goal of our research is to identify the effects of adults' exposure to PWPs on children's labor and schooling. And to answer this question, we leverage large-scale data collected by randomized control trials implemented across urban and rural neighborhoods in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And we present evidence that adults' exposure to a PWP does indeed lead to a reallocation of children's schooling and labor. Our results contribute to a few strands of literature in development economics. First, we contribute to literature on social protection and human capital accumulation. To date, the primary focus of this literature has been on conditional cash transfers. In addition, to the best of our knowledge, our results are the first large-scale experimental evidence of the impacts of PWPs on children's welfare. Thus far, this literature has been largely non-experimental and has generated mixed results. For example, some studies have found that PWPs foster positive impacts on children's cognition, grade progression, and test scores. However, some studies have found that PWPs may decline school enrollment and lead to a deterioration of schooling outcomes. Lastly, in recent years, there has been growing demand to integrate complementary intervention norms such as hard skills training or savings incentive schemes in order to foster longer-term impacts of PWPs. However, very few studies are designed in such a way that allows researchers to identify the added value of these complementary interventions, which we are able to do in the urban study sites that we examine. The interventions under study allow participants the opportunity to earn the daily wage in exchange for work related to the provision of public goods. Common jobs included garbage collection, street cleaning, or road maintenance. In the rural areas, participants are only offered the opportunity to work in public works employment. However, in the urban areas, participants are randomized into a control group or one of 4 treatment arms. A treatment arm that offers the public works employment opportunities only, or the public works opportunities combined with hard skills training, savings incentives, or both the hard skills training and saving incentives. So here, these savings incentives allow participants the option to save $1 a day against additional dollar, which is placed directly into a savings account made available to them at the end of the program. We analyzed data collected from a follow-up survey about 9 to 11 months after the last PWP ends, and we focus on households with children between the ages of 5 and 14. Due to budgetary constraints, all our outcomes are at the household level. For example, our survey captures whether in the last 30 days, a child in the household has performed labor on land, in the family business, related to market or production, or any other economic activities, as well as whether they have performed household chores. Additionally, our survey captures whether the children have never been to school or have dropped out in the last 12 months. We find that our study sample significantly varies between the urban and rural areas in terms of educational attainment, gender, and marital status. Therefore, we present our results separately by urban and rural. To estimate the intent to treat effects of the PWPs on children's outcomes, we use the following linear regression specified by equation 1, where our main outcome variable is the child outcome for respondent I, and again, that is at the household level. We have a treatment indicator, which equals 1 if the respondent is eligible for the PWP and 0 otherwise. We also account for respondent characteristics and strata fixed effects. We show that the normalized differences in the respondent characteristics between treatment and control groups are all under 0.25, showing that our randomization was indeed successful. So now we could go on to estimate the intent to treat impacts of the programs on child labor. Focusing on the rural areas, we find that in response to the PWP, children shift away from household chores and become more likely to perform work on land in the family business or related to the market and production. In the urban areas, we find that children become more likely to perform household chores and work in a family business, and the effects do not significantly vary by treatment arm, with the exception of the saving schemes, which seem to safeguard children from taking up work in a family business. Furthermore, we find that in the rural areas, the increase in child labor reflects a 13.7 percentage point increase in the likelihood that children perform dangerous activities, such as lifting heavy loads or operating heavy machinery. However, there was no such effect in urban areas after accounting for multiple hypothesis testing. Next, moving on to the effects on child schooling, we find that in urban areas, there is evidence of a substitution effect by which the increase in urban child labor is accompanied by an increase in the likelihood that children drop out of school. In the rural areas, we find suggestive evidence that parents may decrease the time children spend in leisure in order to increase the time they spend in both labor and school. Next, we were interested in whether these changes in child labor and schooling reflect changes in adult labor. Focusing at the rural study sites, we find that the effects on adults are concentrated among males, who are now working longer hours in self-employment. Therefore, our results suggest that children may be taking up the dangerous work activities on land that males performed prior to the PWP. At the urban study sites, we find the effects are concentrated among females who are now working longer hours in self-employment as well. Therefore, our results suggest that children may be taking up work to support the female in their self-employed positions or taking up the domestic tasks they performed prior to the PWP. Lastly, we were interested in whether our results reflect changes in household entrepreneurial activities. Focusing on the rural study sites where the effects are concentrated among males, we see that there is an increase in non-farm profit. However, in the urban areas where the effects are concentrated among females, we find no such effect. This finding can explain why we see improvements in child school enrollment in rural areas, but not in urban areas. However, this income effect was not strong enough to safeguard children from taking up dangerous work activities. Furthermore, we find that the PWP induces an increase in the likelihood that the house owns livestock, which aligns with literature that shows that productive assets may unintentionally increase the demand for child labor in poor households. We run a series of robustness checks that further confirm our findings, and I'm happy to discuss these robustness checks in detail if anyone has any questions. In conclusion, we find that the PWP indeed leads to a reallocation of child labor in schooling, and the findings vary between urban and rural areas based on gender-specific changes in the composition of adult employment as well as post-PWP income sources. With this in mind, we do find that PWPs generate some positive economic impacts for adults. Therefore, the main policy implication that emerges from our research highlights the importance for PWP planners to develop strategies that protect children's human capital. Thank you so much. That brings me to the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.